all these different people in the Passion narrative. I think so many of them, they appeal to different parts of our lives, and they speak to us in our moments of despair, doubt, sorrow, death of a loved one, all those different things. And so finding those characters in the Gospels that we'll hear proclaimed throughout Easter really is an invitation for us to say, how am I being a faithful disciple? How am I following the Lord in this, and trusting and knowing that, like Thomas, that Christ says who he is and he does what he says he's going to do. Yeah, so Easter, it's seen, especially the Easter Vigil, it's the Mass par excellence. It's how the liturgy just kind of shows itself in its fullest form, but that the church never can contain herself whenever she really celebrates something. And so we have octaves that we kind of celebrate and prolong the feast day for a little bit longer. And so the Paschal octave of Easter, the Easter octave, it's the 8 days following that. And we remember the 8th day of creation that we enter into with Christ rising from the dead. Everything in the church is all about numbers. And so she loves numbers. It comes from the Jewish kind of concept of time and how we enter into things. And even though we have our structured watches and 7 days a week and things, but this kind of mystical sense of entering into time where Christ has broken through time and space and the bars of sin and death and everything. And so the church can't contain her Easter joy, so she celebrates it for 7 days. And so if you think about Easter, it's 7 times 7. And so 50 days, really, that's 49. But the 50th day being Pentecost, the last day. But for 7 days that week, then the days following Easter, we celebrate. It's like a mini Easter. And so the fatigue of the priests kind of continues somewhat, because we have Gloria at Mass. We have a sequence that's every day. We have all the readings, all the Alleluias that week, the Easter dismissal and things. And so it's like the church just can't contain her joy that Christ is risen from the dead. And she prolongs that celebration as long as she can. And then it drops down solemnity-wise a little bit after the second Sunday of Easter. But
yeah, I always like what Father Dennis said. I'm sure he said it when you went to St. Minor Day. He always says, the Lord is risen, but we're all dead. So that was always something funny. He almost always preached on Easter Monday. So that was one of his comments. We'll be here. We'll be celebrating the Easter octave during that time. The following Sunday is always interesting because, again, I think people imagine that, okay, now Easter's over, so it's just get back to the grind, get back to ordinary time, and we just, as Father Corey said, we continue to celebrate Easter, but there are always these little celebrations along the way. And of course, Sunday after Easter is Divine Mercy Sunday, which I know a lot of people has a special place in their heart. It was instituted by St. Pope John Paul II. I don't know all the dates and all that, but it's also interesting that he died on the vigil, the Saturday before Divine Mercy Sunday. And I don't want to go into all the history of what was the saint's name?
Faustina.
Saint Faustina. She was a Polish nun. Of course, John Paul II was Polish. So that connection there, you just see God's hand in all of this. But the point is that we celebrate Divine Mercy Sunday, just reminding the church of God's his great mercy. And we always hear, it's also called Doubting Thomas Sunday, because we always hear the gospel of Thomas not being present the first time Jesus shows up. And of course, he doesn't believe because, he doesn't see. And I always find that, I think sometimes people give Thomas a bad name. Doubting Thomas. I think Thomas is always an interesting character because so many people can identify with him, primarily because a lot of us just don't believe. I mean, we're science-based and we want to see and touch and have studies and, some proof that something exists. And so Thomas was no different. It's like, I'm not going to believe that Jesus rose from the dead unless I actually put my hands in the wounds. And of course, it's the following week that Christ shows up again and says, here I am, put your hands in your fingers into the wounds and don't be unbelieving, but believe. And of course, once he has proof, we know the rest of the story, which Thomas is one of the apostles that, of course, gives his life eventually for the faith. So I think he's just a great example for so many of us, especially those that need proof. So my advice would be go find that proof because it's out there. Go study the faith. Go study the different proofs that God exists. And if you're like Thomas and you take hold, you grab onto that to our Lord, you'll be able to give your life to that. And so I think a lot of people can identify with Thomas and that Sunday. So, Divine Mercy Sunday, of course, we celebrate that, but it's also Doubting Thomas Sunday. I feel like I'm missing something on that. I don't know if there's another thing that we celebrate. Maybe not. Maybe it's just kind of the end of the octave as well. But, it's also a time where we celebrate First Communions. We'll have First Communion the 2 Saturdays after this coming Saturday or after Easter. This is also a great season for First Communions. So we do those on Saturday mornings at St. Joseph. Again, a lot of parishes will do that at their normal Sunday services, but we have, we've got a lot of people here at St. Joe. We've got big classes, and we just don't have room. And one of the reasons we started doing it, I remember, was back when COVID started, and we had to do it on Saturday morning. And I remember thinking, well, this is kind of odd. Why are we doing these? I'm used to doing them on maybe regular masses, or figuring out a way to do that. And after doing it on a Saturday morning, it was really special because it's about First Communion. It's about the kids and their families. And it's just a really special Mass, and it's just focused on First Communion. And, the practical part of it is the fact that, 10 o'clock you get done, they take their pictures and stuff, and then it's lunchtime, you can go do what you're going to do with the family. So it really works really well here at St. Joe's. So that's a lot of what's going on those next couple of weeks after Easter. So I'm sure Father Corey might have something to add. So
Yeah. Only thing I'd add with Doubting Thomas kind of is, it's a weird take. I had a priest friend in Louisville that preached this once, but he said the doubt that Thomas experienced was the doubt of someone who loved deeply and didn't want to kind of put his faith and his trust that Christ had risen from the dead because his heart had been broken. And so that whole idea that when we have a relationship with God, it demands something of us. And so we have to be able to give of ourselves. And so many people in our world, they say, I don't want to be a Christian. I don't want to follow the Lord because that means I can't do this in my life. I have to say no to this sin or this activity or whatever it is. But Christ always opens us up for freedom. And he always asks, anytime that he asks more from us, he always blesses us with that. And so thinking about Thomas, like when he actually saw Christ, like what it must have been like to stick his hands in his side and in his wounds and things, and to have that, just that joyful kind of spirit that Christ is really risen from the dead, and that it was safe for him to believe, and that everything would be taken care of with that. I don't remember if it was you that was preached on it last year or somebody did, but Mary, thinking about Mary after, on like when Christ rises from the dead, and that surely he probably went to his mom first and must have said like, I'm here. And so the church, that she has that kind of tradition. If you watch Mass at St. Peter's, at the end of Mass, she sings the Regina Caeli, Rejoice Mary, for Christ is risen from the dead, Alleluia. And so we'll do that here at St. Joseph Easter as well, just kind of saying, we honor that Christ suffered in his passion, but Mary journeyed there with the cross with him, and she had to see what a mother should never really have to endure. But all these different people in the passion narrative, I think so many of them, they appeal to different parts of our lives, and they speak to us in our moments of despair, doubt, sorrow, death of a loved one, all those different things. And so finding those characters in the Gospels that we'll hear proclaimed throughout Easter really is an invitation for us to say, how am I being a faithful disciple? How am I following the Lord in this, and trusting and knowing that, like Thomas, that, Christ says who he is, and he does what he says he's going to do. He doesn't lie. Nothing about it is untrue. It's Jesus Christ is risen from the dead, and everything's just true. But those different stories, my favorite ones, Peter after the resurrection, and there's that. It goes back to the whole numbers thing, but Good Friday, we raise the cross 3 times and chant, "Behold the wood of the cross." And then Easter Vigil at the night, we raise the candle, the Paschal candle, and we chant, "The light of Christ." And so everything's this whole reversal of, yes, sin and death took place, but Christ triumphs over that. And so Peter denies the Lord in the Passion and before the cock crows. And then he has that opportunity while Jesus is cooking breakfast, and he says, "Peter, do you love me?" And he has that reversal of it. And so it's always that we might have those moments of despair, despondency, of doubt, but if we let Christ into those moments, it's just pure joy that comes out from that.